And once again, good morning and welcome to BusinessWise Insiders. In a moment, I'll start the presentation. And as usual, I'll keep everybody on mute for that portion of the session, which will run for about 20 or 25 minutes. And after which, as I just mentioned, we'll have a short breakout discussion where you'll get a chance to introduce yourselves, ask questions, and share ideas about today's topic or whatever else is on your mind regarding business development here at the start of 2025. If you do have questions during the presentation, obviously feel free to ask them in the chat window, or you can make a note and ask them later in the breakout discussion. We can get to it then. So with that, let's turn to today's topic. So we're going to take a look at why and how successful sales reps prospect with authority. In other words, using what they know as an effective tool in setting more appointments. Sorry, I'm just gonna... If you wouldn't mind muting yourself if you're not already on mute, that would be great. All right, so let's start with a sort of B2B psychology quiz. And the question is, what is it that motivates your prospect to act, to say yes, to take your call, to open or click on your email, to agree to a meeting, and then ultimately, obviously, to buy your product? There must be a reason, right? Prospects get dozens of cold calls and emails every week. You know because you receive them yourselves, some of which you act on and some of which you ignore. Now, timing and need obviously have a lot to do with it. In other words, if a prospect has a need for what you offer right when you reach out to them and they have the time and bandwidth to actually open and read and potentially click on your email, that's an obvious reason to act. But it doesn't explain why some prospects answer, open, click, respond, and meet even if they don't have a pressing need for your product. And that defines a large majority of the prospects you're reaching out to in that initial cold outreach. You're not always going to hit a prospect at the right time with a need. And the goal is to nevertheless convince those prospects to act on your cold call or your email. So we need to ask ourselves, what other forces are at work and how exactly do we take that default state of inaction and nudge it toward action? And while we might like to think of ourselves and our prospects as completely 100% rational people who consider all of the relevant information and perform a rigorous cost-benefit calculation to guide each of our decisions, the reality is we're not. We don't have the time or the bandwidth. So instead, our brains use mental shortcuts to help us make decisions faster. You may have heard of Dr. Robert Cialdini's book, Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion. Our longtime insiders should remember it because we talk about its concepts often. Dr. Cialdini is a professor of marketing and psychology, and his book is based on that premise that people use mental shortcuts to help them make decisions faster. Dr. Cialdini particularly identified 6 universal principles of persuasion, as he called them, laying out specific triggers that activate these mental shortcuts. Just very quickly, the principles of persuasion here on the slide are: number 1, reciprocity, the concept that people feel obliged to give back to others what they have received. Commitment and consistency, people like to be consistent with the things that they've previously said or done. Social proof is a commonly cited one. People look to the actions of others as a guide, especially when they're uncertain about what to do. Likability and familiarity, people prefer to say yes to those that they like and to whom they are similar. Authority, which we'll be talking about today, people following the lead of credible, knowledgeable experts. And then finally, scarcity, the idea that people want more of the things there are less of. Now, these aren't gimmicks. They're psychological concepts that help explain how prospects synthesize information. And in the context of sales, they can be turned into strategies for clarifying your value, thereby nudging a prospect who's sitting on the fence and who may not yet realize that they can benefit from engaging with you toward that action step. And as I said, today, we're going to be talking about one of those principles, the concept of authority. We're going to take a closer look at exactly how it works on a psychological level, but we're also going to be talking about why it's such a critical concept in today's B2B sales landscape and how the most successful reps use it to achieve success with cold prospecting. And in fact, the first time we covered this topic in detail was, I think, 3 years ago. And even in that short time, so much has changed in the B2B prospecting landscape, and the idea of authority really can be deployed in new and very specific ways to help you set first-time appointments. But the framework is essentially that authority is what sets successful sales reps apart, because merely asking questions about your prospect's pain and then selling your solution to that pain doesn't give your prospects a compelling reason to act, to engage with you, to meet with you, to continue a conversation with you. And you can see here on our right, the Be Wise Owls sort of role-playing that scenario. When the sales rep uses what he or she knows to help their prospect see things differently, the prospect sees value and is more likely to act. So let's start by taking a closer look at the actual psychology of authority, why people are hardwired to respond to it, and some real-world examples that demonstrate its effectiveness. So as I already mentioned, Dr. Cialdini's explanation of the principle of authority is that people follow the lead of credible, knowledgeable experts. And again, our owls are explaining the implicit transaction. So the offer here is, I have knowledge and expertise in an area that you care about. And the natural response is, this person knows what they're talking about. I should listen to what they have to say. One real-world study showed that physical therapists get more patients to follow their recommended exercise programs when they display their diploma on their office wall. So the diploma, as small of a thing as it is, reinforced the therapist's knowledge and expertise, so more patients listened to and followed their recommendations. That's a pretty powerful impact when the only difference was a piece of paper on the wall, and it's something to keep in mind the next time you're at your doctor or dentist's office and they're prominently displaying their Harvard diploma in the waiting room. Another study found that real estate agents generated more appraisals and contracts when the receptionists mentioned their colleagues' credentials and expertise before transferring the call. So for example, when someone called looking for help leasing a property and the receptionist said, I'll transfer you to Lisa, who has over 15 years of experience in leasing properties in this area, it led to a 20% rise in the number of appointments and a 15% increase in the number of signed contracts. So you can see this is much more than just a concept that makes common sense. It's had real and pretty dramatic impacts on the way businesses sell their products. So let's turn to the area that matters to us, which is the context of B2B business development. And in this context, there are a handful of common ways that sales reps and marketers use this concept of authority to entice people to act. Think of all the ad campaigns you've seen where experts are cited to lend credibility to a product. 4 out of 5 dentists agree. So that's using experts to increase the credibility with your prospects. A second common way of deploying authority is influencer marketing, which has been around longer than social media, but the concept is still basically the same, where you market your product to and through people who can spread the word to others. And it's taken on a new life and direction, obviously, in the age of social media. And the reason is that influencers influence people. They have influence for a reason. They have credibility with their sometimes considerably large audiences who look to their actions as a guide. And then the last one here is where we'll really be focusing today, because it's the idea most relevant to B2B sales and prospecting. It's the idea that building and sharing your knowledge gives your prospect a reason to say yes, not just to buying your product, but when faced with all the other small decisions that come up over the course of your interaction, to say yes to whatever you're asking. So now that we've looked at how powerful an impact that perception of authority can have on decision-making, I want to use the next few minutes just talking about how this can, should, and will play out in the context of B2B sales. So the first question is, where does your authority come from? I think this is the hardest question for sales reps to ask, because when they're put on the spot, I think they feel like they don't always have authority, expertise, ideas, insights that are compelling enough to get their prospect to act separate from their product. So we really need to answer the question, how can we find it and how can we grow it? And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this presentation, it's this. Recognize that you likely already are an authority on topics that your prospect really cares about and would really benefit from knowing, but doesn't know them yet. So if you start there, that knowledge, that authority, that expertise is already inside you. It's a great place to actually start digging around and kind of synthesize what it is that's already in your head that could be of value to your prospect and that you can repackage in a way that increases your odds of setting those first-time appointments. Because those insights and ideas and experiences are really ready-made value delivery systems that you can use to entice your prospects. So ask yourself, what do you know that your prospect doesn't? What do you know that will change your prospect's perspective on their own business and shape their future decisions? So here's a couple of more specific questions that can help you home in on the kinds of valuable knowledge you likely already have. What has changed in your prospects industry over the past 1, 3, or 5 years? And the reason you know this is because you've worked with clients likely that are in your prospects industry. Most businesses commonly serve a handful of industries that are positioned to benefit from what you offer. So you already work with clients sort of across industries that can help you identify changes and trends that will be valuable to your prospects. More specifically, is there new technology emerging in your prospects industry, and what stories can you tell about how you've helped clients navigate those technological transitions in the past? Secondly, are there new barriers to success in the industry? What are you seeing with your current clients in that regard? And then finally, where are the trends pointing, and what does that mean for achieving success in the future? So then, same question, but this time for your own industry. What has changed in your industry over the past 1, 3, or 5 years that your prospect might not know about? Is there new technology, again, that you've used to help clients? An example from our own experience might be the advent of automated email prospecting campaigns that lead to more consistent and successful email lead gen with less effort on the part of our clients. Or even more recently, the advent of generative AI and how B2B sales reps and marketers are using it to craft messages that resonate with prospects. So again, technology is always something that's changing pretty rapidly and that you're going to have knowledge and experience about that might be of value to your prospect. But then same question for your own industry, what obstacles are emerging and how are you advising clients to overcome them? Again, an example from our own industry is cold calling has gotten a lot harder over the past 10, 20 years. It's harder to get people on the phone. It's harder to get people to call you back. So we need to adapt to accommodate that challenge. And it's something that we have a lot of experience working with clients in addressing. And then finally, one of my favorite questions, if you couldn't offer your product, how would you help your prospect? What information can you convey that would lead to better decisions? Because again, this is really about sort of divorcing the problem that your product solves, because your prospect really isn't at the stage where they're even thinking about buying it. You need to give them information separate from your product that will compel them to act, to have a conversation with you, and to respect you as a credible authority on something that they care about. So just a few quick takeaways as we close out this section. Number one, again, you already know a lot. Something you should repeat to yourself because I think it can push you in the right direction in terms of developing and growing authority. You know it from your own experience working with clients in different industries and the expertise you've developed in your own industry. Both of these bodies of knowledge are critical to your client's success, but your client doesn't have the perspective on them that you do. Secondly, you're also in a great position to learn more because you work in your field every day and can develop insights that your clients can't. And then finally, you have access to your clients, likely multiple clients working in the same industry, and they can tell you what they're seeing. So you should ask them and then think about what their answers mean for your other clients and prospects. All right, so now that we've talked about finding and growing the authority that you likely already have, we need to talk a little bit about how to deploy that authority for better biz dev results. And this is really the crux of the issue. Our ultimate goal as a sales rep, of course, is to capture opportunities, set appointments, and sell stuff to prospects who will benefit from it. But it's also the most difficult piece of this puzzle because it means taking what you know and actually putting it out there in a way that will resonate with your prospects enough that they will be interested in learning more, even if the conversation ends there. And that's really the hard part. Even if the conversation ends there, that question I just asked about how could you help your prospect if you couldn't sell them your product? That's a hard question to answer, because we all think about our product and its features and benefits every day, and that's ultimately what we're selling. So it's really hard to sort of separate the two and then figure out how to package that authority in a way that will compel your prospects to act. So let's first think about where and when it's most important to offer value in the form of this knowledge, insight, and expertise. And if it isn't already obvious, your value must be bigger than just your product, as I just mentioned. Because at the moment you cold call or cold email your prospects, they're likely not thinking about buying anything and may never become a client. Your product is the ultimate destination here at the top of the mountain, but your prospects need a reason to get on the mountain in the first place, and they need a reason to climb to the next level. So there needs to be intrinsic value separate from your product at every stage of this journey. So returning to some of the questions that I posed at the beginning of the presentation, your prospect needs a reason, a specific reason to take your call, to open your email, to respond to your message, to continue that conversation, to agree to meet, and then ultimately, of course, to buy your product. And your own authority is a really compelling reason. It's the one thing that sets you apart from everyone else. So whenever you ask your prospect to take any action, think about presenting your knowledge and expertise as the value they will receive in return. And as I mentioned, remember that the conversation may never go any further. And while it's not the ideal scenario, of course, it does force you to squeeze as much value into every interaction because you may never get another chance. So here's a helpful way to frame it. Imagine your prospect isn't just asking, why should I do this thing? Answering your call, clicking on your email, taking a meeting. Imagine they're asking, what do I get in return for doing this thing, even if I never become a client? And 3 really good answers are, you get knowledge. So you'll learn the key forces and trends that will shape the industry over the next 12 to 18 months, the answers to some of those questions I posed earlier. Secondly, you'll get intelligence in the form of information about how other firms in your industry are adapting and staying ahead of the curve. That's a really compelling value proposition. Let's talk and I'll tell you what I'm seeing from other clients who work in your industry, because that's going to pique their interest every time, even if they're not even thinking about buying your product. And then maybe even most importantly, they're going to gain perspective. So the key thing that you can give your prospect that they don't already have is a new way of thinking about priorities and problems. Even if a prospect thinks they know everything, there's always something that can unlock a new way of looking at it. So the information that you provide them can help redefine their idea of success and clarify their decisions to make it easier to tackle those priorities and problems that they already know they have. And finally, I wanted to close out the presentation with something a little bit different. Since we're talking about authority, I thought it'd be good to take a look at what some of the most authoritative voices on selling in 2025 had to say about this issue. So I've selected a handful of quotes from articles by experts in this field. So the first expert is Anthony Iannarino, who we cite frequently and whose website, the Sales Blog, is full of really excellent practical advice about how to successfully navigate today's selling landscape. He's a big proponent of cold calling and a big proponent of value selling in the form of providing knowledge and insights. And in a recent blog post, he wrote this: if your cold call provides neither value nor the promise of value, no client will make space on their calendar. And this quote really crystallizes the issue because it emphasizes this transactional nature of every stage of the sales process. So if I don't get something, value, I'm not going to go out of my way to give something, time on my calendar. So you might be asking yourself, well, shouldn't I just ask questions and listen to what my prospect had to say? We've heard for years that sales reps should spend more time listening than talking, and that they should dig to discover pain points to point their prospect toward a solution. But Iannarino writes that in fact, asking questions offers proof that you are not the value proposition, because it means you're asking more of your prospect in return for what? They're giving you answers instead of you giving them answers. So if that's the case, then how do we provide that value? And this is a great quote here, the second point on the slide. You are part catalyst, part instigator, part agitator, and part prophet. So it's not really even your knowledge itself that's the value proposition. It's how that knowledge helps change perspective and create action. On the previous slide, I mentioned that perspective is one of the best things, most valuable things that you can offer your prospects. And this quote, how to package your knowledge to shift perspective, I think is really key. And then finally, according to Iannarino, that's really your ultimate goal, to teach your client what factors to consider and how to weight them, and then exploring change to define their future potential. And then just one more quote before we wrap up. This one is from a white paper by the Rain Group, which is a sales training organization based in Boston. And they write that today's sales winners go beyond uncovering buyer needs and matching their products and services as solutions to buyer problems. So this gets at that question from our last slide about why sales reps can no longer just ask questions to discover pain and then sell a solution. And the quotes on the right here are almost a perfect summary of what we've covered today. Sales winners, firstly, find and communicate value. They provide valuable ideas and insights during the sales process. Secondly, they change their prospect's perspective, really critical. They redefine what buyers think they need and then how to address those needs. And then finally, they themselves become the value. And this is exactly what today's buyers are looking for. And just a couple of points about how this is all playing out in today's B2B sales landscape. I mentioned cold calling is hard and getting harder. Cold emailing has become extremely saturated over the past few years. And even those automated campaigns, which had paid real dividends 5 years ago, are getting harder because at their essence, they are mass email campaigns, and it's hard to provide buyer-specific, prospect-specific value in the context of those. And then, of course, the advent of AI, I think has, on one hand, created a great new tool that sales reps can use, but on the other hand, has crystallized the contexts in which providing that human experience, insight, value becomes even more of an important commodity to add to the process. So these are things that I think you should keep in mind as you think about how to deploy value in new and different ways that will resonate with your prospects. And I'm happy to talk about it in the breakout discussion. So thanks again for sitting through the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.